Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Today, we have one story, but it's a big one. Let's go. You're replaceable, said the boss. I don't usually tell people where I come from. If you met me a couple of years ago, you'd just see another guy in steel-toe boots, stained work pants, and a thermos that smelled like burnt coffee. Shop rat, mill guy, maybe maintenance dude. That's how people introduced me. Nobody ever guessed that my family owned half the valley. We've been in Oregon since before anyone bothered putting street signs on the roads. My great-grandfather came out here with a mule, a wagon, and more stubbornness than sense. He cleared land, planted hay, ran cattle. When my grandfather took over, he bought more acres, then more, then some forested hills the loggers didn't want back in the day. By the time my dad was running things, we had farmland, pasture, and a whole lot of timber. Instead of logging everything ourselves, he leased parts of the land to different companies. One of those companies was a lumber mill just outside of town. Cedar Ridge Timber Company. I grew up seeing those trucks roll by loaded with logs, then heading out empty toward the hills. But I never thought much about it. For me, the land was just there. Fences, fields, some forest, a river cutting through the far corner. I helped with hay in the summers, fixed fences in the winters, bottle-fed calves, all the usual farm kid stuff. But I never wanted to be the farmer's son who's going to take over. I wanted to work a normal job with normal people where nobody cared what my last name was. So at 19, instead of going to college or staying full-time on the farm, I applied at Cedar Ridge. Filled out the application like everyone else, no mention of land, no, you know who I am? Nothing. Just, I can work long hours, I can lift heavy things, and I don't mind grease under my nails. They hired me on the yard crew. First few years were exactly what I needed. Hard work, good people. The old mill manager, Hank, was one of those calm, competent guys who could fix anything with a crescent wrench and a piece of wire. He'd walk the floor with a coffee mug in one hand and a grease rag in the other. Listen, kid, he told me once when I was 22 and sweating over a jammed conveyor, you learn the machines, you'll never be out of work a day in your life. So I learned. Every motor, every belt, every hydraulic line. Eventually, I moved from yard monkey to maintenance. And by 30, I was the guy they called when something broke in the middle of the night. Then Hank retired, and corporate sent Ethan. I still remember the first time I saw him, standing in the middle of the mill floor wearing a brand new flannel shirt that looked like it still smelled of the store, spotless boots, and glasses that probably cost more than my truck payment. He clapped his hands like he was starting a team-building exercise. All right, everyone, he yelled, his voice echoing off the steel and concrete. Things are about to change around here. We're going to bring Cedar Ridge into the 21st century. Efficiency, accountability, no more dead weight. Next to me, Rick muttered, dead weight, huh? Buddy, you couldn't find the main breaker with a map. I tried to give the benefit of the doubt. New boss, new style, fine. But it didn't take long to see what kind of guy he was. He held meetings where he talked about KPIs and synergies, while half the room stared blankly and the other half silently timed how long he could talk without saying anything. He tightened schedules, cut overtime, and started writing people up for being 3 minutes late because the train blocked the crossing. And he loved reminding everyone that we were replaceable. Look, he said one day during a safety meeting, pacing in front of us, nobody's irreplaceable. If you don't perform, we'll find someone who will. He said it like a threat to guys who'd been running these saws since before he graduated high school. For a while, I stayed under his radar. I did my job, fixed his messes, ignored the eye-roll-inducing speeches. Then my appendix decided to explode. It started as a dull ache late in my shift. I figured, bad burrito. By midnight, it felt like someone was twisting a knife under my ribs. By 2 a.m., I was on the floor in my kitchen, sweating, trying not to vomit, insisting to myself that it'd pass. It didn't. My sister drove me to the ER at 3 in the morning. I remember the white lights, the cold hands, the words appendicitis, and we need to operate now. They knocked me out. When I woke up, I had a new scar, an IV line, and enough pain meds in me to tranquilize a horse. I fumbled for my phone. There were already texts from my supervisor, Dan. You okay? Heard you were in the hospital. Don't worry about work. We'll cover. I replied with something like, still alive, no appendix. Doc says few days at least. Dan sent back a thumbs up and I'll let Ethan know. Apparently that part didn't go well. The next morning around 9, my phone rang. I could barely lift my head, but I answered. Hello? Why am I hearing from Dan and not from you? Ethan's voice, irritated. I swallowed, my throat raw. They just pulled a piece of my insides out last night. Sorry I didn't file paperwork from the operating table. You know the policy, he snapped. Requests for medical leave have to be submitted in advance or as soon as possible. I have a schedule to run. You can't just vanish. I stared at the ceiling tile above me, counting the little holes so I wouldn't say what I wanted to say. I texted Dan, I'm in the hospital. I can send a picture of the IV if that helps. This isn't funny, he said. How long are you going to be out? Doctor said at least a week, I said, maybe more. I can't exactly crawl under conveyors like this. There was a pause, then a sigh. The kind people do when they think you're being difficult. A week? We don't have that kind of flexibility. If you're not back in 48 hours, I'll have to replace you. I actually laughed. It hurt like hell, and I regretted it instantly. Ethan, I can't even stand up on my own. That's not my problem, he said. Policy is policy. The nurse walked in while I was still holding the phone. She saw my face, frowned, and quietly checked my vitals. Everything okay? She mouthed. I just shook my head. 48 hours later, I was still hooked up to machines, still on painkillers, still very much not in any condition to go to a lumber mill full of spinning blades. I didn't call. I didn't have the energy to argue with a man who thought HR memos were more important than internal organs. The email came that afternoon. Subject, notice of termination. Legal language, HR boilerplate, the works. Something about unexcused absence and failure to comply with attendance policy. I stared at it on my phone and felt weirdly calm. I was angry, yeah, but it was almost a clean kind of anger. Sharp, focused. Dan called that evening. Man, I'm so sorry, he said. I argued with him. I told him the whole story. He doesn't care. He keeps saying, if I bend the rules for one person, everyone will expect special treatment. Yeah, I said quietly. That sounds like him. You gonna fight it? Dan asked. I hesitated. You know what? No, I think I'm just gonna let things play out. And that's where my part in the story should have ended. Except I made one small mistake. I told my dad. He came to visit me the next day carrying a plastic grocery bag with homemade soup and mason jars, and a look that said he didn't quite trust the hospital food. How you doing? He asked, sitting down. Doc says you scared him a little. I'm fine, I said, just missing a part I wasn't using. He chuckled, but it faded when he saw my face. What happened? I told him everything. The pain, the rush to the hospital, the phone call with Ethan, the threat, the email, the firing. My dad listened without interrupting, his hands folded, eyes fixed on me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So they fired you, he said slowly, for getting emergency surgery? Yep. And this Ethan, he's the new guy corporate sent in? The one that keeps yelling about efficiency? Yep. Dad leaned back in the chair, looking up at the ceiling like he was counting his thoughts. What's the lease date, he asked. It threw me off. What? The lease, he repeated, for the mill property. When's it up? I blinked. I don't know, you handle all that. Why? He nodded to himself. I think it's this year, October. That's about 4 months from now. He looked back at me. You want us to renew it? I stared at him, the pieces not quite falling into place yet. The mill property, the 46 acres of graded yard, access road, log deck, and the little office building with the faded Cedar Ridge Timber Company sign. The land they'd paved, fenced, built on, and run trucks across every day for as long as I'd been alive. That land, it didn't belong to Cedar Ridge. It belonged to us, to my family. My grandfather had leased it to the original mill owner decades ago. When he died, my dad kept the lease going. Every renewal was a handshake, a signature, and a check that wasn't anywhere near what the land was worth. I'd never really thought about it beyond, we've got some land leased to the mill. Now I thought about it. Hard. Do you want to renew it? Dad asked again. I thought of Ethan's voice in my ear. If you're not back in 48 hours, I'll have to replace you. I don't know, I said. What are they paying now? Dad named a number. It was low, like renting a house in the 90s low. Jesus, I muttered. You know that's at least 10 times under market, right? He nodded. I know, but Hank was a good man. They gave a lot of guys work. I figured leave it as it is, help the community. He rubbed his jaw. But if the people running it now are the kind that fire my kid from a hospital bed? His eyes hardened in a way I didn't see often. Well, he said softly, that changes the math. We spent the next week looking up land values, talking to a lawyer, checking the lease details. The current lease had a simple clause. Renewals are subject to mutual agreement between leaseor and leasee. No automatic renewal, no guaranteed extensions, no lock-in, just both sides have to say yes. Our lawyer asked, "You want to terminate?" Dad shook his head. "No, that would be emotional and stupid. We'll offer them a renewal at market rate." He looked at me. "What's the going price for industrial land per acre over there?" I told him. He nodded. We set the number. It wasn't spiteful. It wasn't jacked up. It was just fair. Very, very different from what they'd been paying. 4 months passed faster than I expected. I healed, got the staples out, started moving around like a human again instead of a broken marionette. I picked up odd jobs on the farm, helped with repairs, did some contract maintenance work for a different plant across the county. I drove past the mill a few times. Trucks still rolled in, logs still stacked up. I saw Ethan once in the yard, standing with some corporate-looking guys, pointing at things with a clipboard like he knew what he was talking about. The lease meeting was scheduled on a Tuesday in our lawyer's office. 2 suits from corporate flew in. One was a regional VP type, slick hair, polished shoes, permanent fake smile. The other looked like an accountant. Ethan came with them, of course, in his perfectly ironed flannel and carefully scuffed-looking boots that had obviously never seen actual mud. Dad shook hands all around, polite but cool. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Let's get to it." Our lawyer slid copies of the proposed renewal across the table. The regional VP skimmed, humming under his breath. Ethan didn't touch it at first. He was too busy watching me, like he hadn't expected to see me there. He finally said with a little smirk, "Didn't think you were still involved." "I am," I said, "just in a different department, you could say." The VP stopped humming. "Whoa, hold on," he said, frowning. "This can't be right. This is $12,000 a month?" "That's market rate," our lawyer said. "We've attached documentation. You're currently paying $11.50. That number hasn't changed in over 20 years. We have a lease," the VP said. "You had," the lawyer replied calmly. "The current term expires next month. Renewal is optional. This is the new offer." Ethan's smirk cracked. "That's insane," he snapped. "We can't afford that. That's 10 times what we're paying." Dad folded his hands on the table. "I understand," he said. "You have to decide if the location is worth it. You're free to decline. We're not forcing you to stay." The accountant type was flipping through the papers now, his face getting redder by the second. "There's got to be some misunderstanding," he said. "We've been on that land for 40 years. You can't just—" 41, Dad corrected, still calm. "Leased, from us, at a friendly rate. Because we like the people running the place. People who treated their workers like human beings." He turned his eyes to Ethan. "People like Hank." Silence dropped like a stone. Ethan swallowed. "The behavior of one manager doesn't represent the whole company," he started. I leaned forward. "That one manager fired a guy from his hospital bed," I said quietly, "for emergency surgery, then told everyone they're replaceable. So we're just replacing you." The VP shot Ethan a sharp look. "You did what?" "It's not that simple," Ethan stammered. "He didn't follow procedure, and—" "Doesn't matter," Dad cut in, his voice suddenly steel. "You can talk policy all you want. This is a business decision. We're offering you the land at market value. Take it or find somewhere else." The VP looked like he wanted to argue. Then he did the math in his head. Cost of relocation, downtime, new grading, new access roads, permits, and went pale. "Can we negotiate?" he asked. "Sure," Dad said. "You can send a counteroffer through our lawyer. We'll review." We shook hands. They left, stiff and quiet. Ethan didn't look back when he walked out. A week later, a counteroffer arrived. It was barely above what they were already paying, given our long-standing partnership, blah, blah, blah. Dad read it, snorted, and slid it across the table to me. "What do you think?" I looked at the number, thought about the long years of cheap rent, my grandfather's handshake deals, Hank's quiet competence, and Ethan's voice in my ear. "If you're not back in 48 hours... "No," I said. "Either they pay market or they go." Dad nodded. Our lawyer sent back a polite rejection. What followed was 3 months of the slowest, most satisfying revenge I've ever witnessed. Trucks started leaving with equipment instead of logs. Some machines were sold off, others got shipped to another facility 2 states over. They laid people off. Good people, guys I'd worked with for a decade. I helped some of them write resumes, called around for openings, put in a good word where I could. Every time I drove by, there were fewer cars in the lot. Then one morning, the sign came down. Cedar Ridge Timber Company, gone. Just a rectangle of less faded wall where it had hung. The company lasted a little while longer on paper, but that site was done. I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. 2 months after the last truck rolled out, my uncle called. He's the kind of guy who always sounds like he's about to tell a joke, even when he's talking about taxes. "Hey, kid," he said, "you hear about the auction?" "What auction?" "Cedar Ridge Assets," he said. "Equipment, licensing, remaining inventory. They're liquidating what's left of that site. I bought a chunk of it this morning." "You what?" "Yeah," he laughed. "Got a hell of a deal on the debarker and a couple of planers. Here's the fun part, though. The receivers won out of the whole thing. No appetite to keep trying. They offered to sell the name, the permits, the rest of the machinery, everything." I sat down hard. "And?" I asked. "And I don't need a mill," he said, "but you might." My heart started beating faster. "I can't afford—" "Relax," he said. "This isn't some Wall Street buyout. They want out. I'm carrying most of it if you want in." "You've got something they don't." "What's that?" I asked. "You've got the land," he said simply, "and you actually give a damn about the people who work there." A month later, after more paperwork than I ever thought existed in the world, I signed the last set of documents in that same lawyer's office. I walked out the legal owner of a lumber mill. Smaller now, a bit battered, but still standing. On the first day we reopened under the new name, we dropped Cedar Ridge. That belonged to the mess it became. I stood in the yard and watched the first truck pull in. The air smelled like fresh-cut pine and diesel. Some of the old crew were there, Dan, Rick, a few others. They grinned, shook my hand a bit too hard, teased me about being the boss now. I told them nothing important was changing. We were just going to do things the way they should have always been done. No corporate buzzwords, no threats, no everyone's replaceable. Later that week, I heard through the grapevine what happened to Ethan. Corporate dumped him halfway through the relocation mess. Official reason, failure to maintain stable operations and poor labor management. Unofficially, he pissed off the wrong people while standing on the wrong land. Last I heard, he moved back to Portland. Consulting, someone said with a straight face, which I assume means giving TED Talk level speeches about leadership to people who don't know any better. Sometimes when I lock up the mill late and the yard's quiet, I stand by the edge of the property and look out over the fields and trees my great-grandfather fought the dirt for. I think about Ethan leaning over me through a phone speaker while I was in a hospital bed saying, "Nobody is replaceable." And I can't help but smile, because in the end he was right. Nobody's irreplaceable, especially not the guy who thinks he owns the world while standing on someone else's ground. Judging people by their appearance, you get exactly that result. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.